Welcome to today's webinar in the Knowledge Miles series, part of the Lord Mayor's lectures on behalf of Alderman Professor Michael Mainelli, whose theme for his mayoral year is Connect to Prosper. In this free online lecture series, we address the connections in and around the Square Mile, what Michael likes to call the world's coffee house, and how these might help us to tackle future global challenges. I'm Professor Tim Connell, Chairman of the Gresham Society and a Fellow of Gresham College here in the City of London, and I'm also a liveryman of the Stationers' Company. I'll be convening the session today and moderating the questions and answers afterwards. So this is the plan for today. It's a very brief introduction from myself, the keynote presentation from Dr. Pirro Hysi, and we'll then have about 20 minutes for questions. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Pirro Hysi, who is an honorary associate professor at King's College London. Pirro, can you tell us something about yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Connell. I define myself as a data scientist, which often means that I am at heart a geneticist interested in how genes can affect health and can cause diseases if they do. And I have a particular interest in pigmentation, among other traits and phenotypes in humans. So that's why I'm here today, to share some thoughts about genetics of pigmentation.
Right. So can you tell us more about eye color, and especially something more about the beautiful science behind it?
So again, as just mentioned, today's topic is going to be eye colors and the beautiful science behind it. Before I put those slides together, I was just wondering if there are any recurrent themes in which we use the words eye and colors. And very predictably, normally we just use those words in three different themes, in three different contexts. The first one is to describe the eye anatomy, to describe notions that are related to the visual senses. We tend to use those eyes in the internet and in newspapers and books to describe social interactions between each other, and we tend to use the words eye, iris, and eye color in arts and poetry. And these current streams will actually permeate the next few slides over the next 20 minutes or so. The word iris comes from Greek. It actually means rainbow or halo. Iris was the mythological goddess of rainbow, and she was a carrier of the highest Olympian god's messages. Very fittingly, she was the child of wonder, and the mother of Eros, known otherwise as the god of love in ancient Greek mythology. So it's a very fitting name to describe a part of the eye. But rather unfittingly, the surviving statues of Iris are actually notably lacking eyes. The eyes are blank, which is something that we see in those statues I'm showing on the slides, but it's something that we have seen in most of the statues that we have inherited from antiquity. And this is because not because the eye color was not something that ancient artists were interested in, but because time has done its trick. All the pigments were actually bleached out because of time, because of the conditions they were held in. The neoclassicist artists and art critics were often admiring the marbles, the Greek marbles, as a screen in which they could project their emotions. In the purest form, they seemed to put the emphasis on the movement and on the posture. And again, that was a discovery of feelings and emotions that was not hindered by colors or other distractions. However, the antiquity was very interested in eyes and in eye color since the very dawn of history of art. Plato described the eyes as the most important part of the body that should be painted with the most beautiful colors. Here in this slide, I'm actually showing the two very famous sculptures, which are held actually a few miles up the road from where I am right now. So these are the Riace men. These are the two bronze statues from the 5th century before Christ. And you could see that both of them have eyes of different colors. You can see that the presence or absence of the eyes gives the facial expressions some different characteristics. On the left, you have the complete statue with both eyes in it, and you could see the concentration in that person's face. On the right, you have a partially missing, like one eye is missing from the face, and it seems that the statue is like standing back, not staring at you, but seems more reflective and more thoughtful, and in a way just allows us, the beholders, to think deeper and perhaps like project part of the emotion to that empty statue. There has been a lot of interest historically, as just mentioned, in the color of the eyes. Most of the eyes in antiquity were actually inlaid. So the eye sockets were empty in the bronze statues, or they were just painted over the marble in the marble statues. So these photographs were taken from some artifacts that are displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And you can see that in the ancient world, the eyes, and particularly the eye colors, were very well explored. The statue on the right is a statue of Athena, and that's again been made around the 4th century before Christ. And you could see that the color of the eyes has this tonality that leans towards light blue. So it seems that the ancient artists have been exploring the whole range of the eye colors, and you could see in these slides here how variable there are across the human species. What causes the eye color? Eye color, like any other pigmentation traits, arises from the different quantities and qualities of the pigment called melanin. Melanin, in its purest form, is at the very core has this red-colored core that is called pheomelanin, and the normal melanin pigment is a outer layer of it and has a very distinct dark color that gives the brown color to our hair, skin, or eyes, depends on the how much pigmentation we have. So in the eyes, it's slightly different. If you have a lot of concentration of melanin, then the eyes of that person are going to be brown. If there's not a lot of light, the eyes are not red because of that effect that you often see in the oceans. The eye gets diffracted in a certain way that gives the illusion of blue, which arises again from the depth of the diffraction of the eyes in the iris. The blue eyes, or the eye color variability, is spread around the world. It's mostly concentrated in Europe, but it also is seen in parts of Asia and in some Native American or Alaskan populations in the American continent. But the highest concentration of the highest prevalence of eye colors is obviously, as I just mentioned, seen in Europe. The epicenter of eye colors has two epicenters. One of them is the Baltic republics around the Lithuanian Estonian border, and the other place with a very high prevalence of blue colors is the island of Iceland in northeastern Europe. You could see that certain populations in Europe, especially the southern part of Europe, tends to have a very high prevalence of brown eyes and a very low prevalence of blue eyes. The eye color is one of those traits that was often thought of as monogenic. It is famously 100% heritable. It makes predicting the eye colors in children relatively easy given the complexity of the trait. The environmental effects on the eye color are very minimal, although children tend to have bluer or lighter eye colors at birth, and they normally stabilize in 85 to 90% of the populations before the age of 6. Normally, female individuals, like women, tend to have lighter eyes than men, but this is again a relative effect and it's not absolute. Part of what we do is to search for genes that cause differences in eye colors. Now, all the humans are almost identical. 99.999% of our genes are the same, and we all have inherited exactly the same genes as each other. What makes a difference among us is the tiny changes within the sequence of individual genes. And those tiny changes in the sequence can determine the color of people's eyes or can determine other traits ranging from shoe size, body height, body weight, and other particular traits that we can think of. We have done this through a couple of studies, and we, for this purpose, investigate a particularly large number of European volunteers. The biggest of such study was conducted by our group, and the former member of our group, Mark Simpson, was the author in that science paper. We identified over 200 changes that can cause individuals to have blue or green eyes, as opposed to the brown eyes, which is default in most of the European populations and global populations as well. What causes these changes? How do these changes arise and get fixated in the population? Those mutations are born randomly. So in a population, in a particular individual at a particular point in time, there is a spontaneous change in the sequence. But if those changes in the sequence are advantageous, they gradually spread across populations. So you could see here where we think that a lot of those changes that today are associated with bluer eye colors were born. At what time in history and what geographic location? We often have ancient DNA and historical evidence for a lot of those primitive mutations that have occurred way back in the past. I just wanted to get your attention to the OCA2 gene, which is, again, responsible for a substantial number of blue eye colors in Europe, in modern-day Europe. And I've highlighted where those mutations were essentially born and how they spread throughout history all the way to the modern-day Europe. The OCA2 variants were thought to have been born around the Caucasus region, in between modern-day Russia and Ukraine. and they have gradually spread alongside the Indo-European populations moving north, so that northward movements carry the OCA2 gene mutations all the way to the Baltic and then to Iceland. Here I'm also showing the other variants that are less relevant to the eye colors, but more relevant to some other pigmentation traits which are not going to be of interest for today's talk. As I just mentioned, the OCA2 mutations are responsible for the vast majority of blue eye colors. They are alone responsible for 75% of the blue eyes that are in circulation in Europe today. It is slightly less influential when you compare the blue eyes versus the entire spectrum. So, but it's still like a substantial part of the variability, almost like the same gene unit. There are two adjacent genes that are located together on chromosome 15, and one of those genes regulates the expression of the other. So HERC2 is a gene that mechanistically causes the blue eyes, but the OCA2 is a regulator where the mutations are located. There are several variants in the OCA2 regions, and they're predominantly seen in Europeans, but not only. As I will be discussing later on today, there is something called convergence. So different mutations can arise at different points, at different populations at the same time, and they cause the same phenotype, although there's not a continuous population history, but there are parallel events. Most of those mutations are loss of function mutations. In other words, they impede the melanin to essentially create functional dark units that are characteristic of the melanosomes and give the eyes or any other tissues the distinct brown color. And some of those variants can determine like the color of the eye, whether it's like light or dark, but some of those variants can determine further shades of the eye color, so they can determine the difference between a blue eye and a green eye as well. It is interesting because the European population in modern day, in contemporary societies, can only contribute for between 10 and 15% of the world's genetic diversity. So it is a reasonably small, fairly small amount of diversity that arises from contemporary European populations. However, over 80% of the pigmentation genetic diversity arises from Europe. So there's a change in proportions here. To achieve that sort of genetic diversity in contemporary populations, we would have probably needed around 900,000 years of genetic variation history. But this is not impossible. It is impossible. It's not possible because Europe has only been colonized for 35,000 years. So simply that diversity that is associated with the eye colors has been so accelerated, has happened over a fraction of what we would have expected to be needed to achieve that high level of diversity. So what is the reason? We believe it's natural selection in some ways. So here in the slides, I'm showing the score for the brown eyes versus blue eyes. And we see that about like 40,000 years ago, virtually every individual colonizing Europe at the time had brown eye colors. A few exceptions here and there, but overall, you could actually tell that the genetic makeup of the populations in Europe pretty much had brown eyes. And with time, the amount of the genetic load that is causing lighter eye colors has been increasing. In other words, the average eye color in the European populations just started leaning more towards blue and lighter tonalities. In the modern day populations, you could see that the European populations have obviously like a large amount of people with blue eyes, and the number of people or the prevalence of darker eye colors in African and East Asians and South Asians has remained pretty much the same as it was in ancient times. What is the reason behind that? We believe that part of the reason can lie in the phenomenon of pleiotropy, and pleiotropy is the ability of a gene or the gene mutation to cause multiple phenotypes at the same time. So here I'm showing some of the preliminary results from a publication that we are hoping to submit very soon, led by the member of our lab, Zihe Zhu. And here she has found out that the genes, very predictably, the genes that cause like changes in the eye color are also genes that can cause changes in the hair color, skin color, or in other phenotypes, disease phenotypes such as skin melanomas. So it is possible that these other phenotypes like melanoma have been driving the nature selection. In the Northern Europeans, there is less of potential to get enough sunshine, and those populations tend to be a lot more susceptible to the sunshine if the melanin is outside a certain narrow range. This is determined by the equilibrium between the need equilibrium between the right intensity of the vitamin D metabolism. In other words, we need a sufficient quantities of vitamin D, and for that we just require a certain amount of sunshine exposure and ultraviolet radiation in our skin. But on the other hand, too much sunshine means that we will disturb our folate metabolism, which is particularly deleterious to newborn babies or during the pregnancy. Also, the presence or absence of certain amounts of melanin in the skin can disrupt the functionality of the skin barrier function in dry and hot environments, which is less of a problem in Northern Europeans versus like Southern Europeans. So you have to have the right amount for the geographic latitude in which those ancestral populations were based. And the presence or absence of certain amounts of melanin in the skin also can change the efficacy of the microbial resistance in the skin. So these are some of the main hypotheses why those pigmentation genes have been selected for or against during the population history of Europe. Also, eye colors are associated with different health and diseases. So among the effects they have, bright colors can actually just change the acuity in dim lights. So we believe that individuals with very like the blue eyes are slightly better at seeing objects in the darkness, because the melanin in the eyes is responsible for absorption of certain photons, which can be particularly useful in Southern European populations where the sunshine intensity is very high, and less of a problem in northern latitudes. There are also diseases that are associated with eye colors. Some of them are actually diseases of the eye. So with different eye color groups have different prevalence of cataract, age-related macular degeneration, pigmentary glaucoma, and even Alzheimer's. It is, however, not certain if those diseases have been instrumental in the process of natural evolution, because they are late onset disorders, so they tend not to affect so much the fitness and the abilities of individuals to reproduce and have children. But however, this is an open hypothesis. And finally, eye colors, particularly through their partial association with skin color, are associated with skin cancers. Melatonin is something that really actively prevents the development of skin cancers. And tanning response is also like an intermediate phenotype that can affect the ability of certain individuals to resist or to have like a lower prevalence of skin cancer. However, those factors are not the only reasons that have driven the prevalence of the eye colors historically. We believe that behavioral factors are very important in establishing or in favoring the blue eye colors in certain regions of Europe. We believe that eye colors are important in human interactions, and here's the famous metaphorical use of the phrase that eyes serve as a window to the souls in a societal or interactive context. Also, we just believe that individuals really establish relationships through partially like judging based on the color of the eye. So there's something that influences their decisions and their interpersonal affinities. Some of us might actually remember the Uncanny Valley, which was a video game that was developed a few years ago. And the way it worked is that the authors of this video game essentially generate like a few random portraits of characters, and those characters had essentially unique features. And they ask users like what they made of these faces, randomly generated faces, and why they made certain decisions. Why did they believe that those images had certain characteristics? And you could see that in the list on the right, the eye colors of that particular individual was one of the main reasons why the users of that video game believed that the person was trustworthy, was a good person, a negative character, violent, or peaceful. So that demonstrates to a certain extent that part of our judgment of people is based on the color of the eyes and as part of the general physiognomy. This is backed up by a lot of studies. So we have many publications right now that point to the sex-specific natural selection as a driver of the blue eyes in Northern Europe. Some of the studies mentioned that blue-eyed individuals tend to mate and create families with individuals with the same eye colors. This effect is particularly pronounced for individuals who have blue eyes, and they are particularly prone to having partners with blue eyes too. This effect is a little less significant in individuals who have brown eyes, but is still quite present in those individuals as well. Finally, I just wanted to say that the blue eyes are not found only in modern day Europe, but they have been present throughout history. We have evidence now that the Neanderthals had variability in the eye colors. We are aware right now at least 7 variants that are predicted to have coded for blue eyes in those ancient populations. All of these loci were very polymorphic, and they were located in the same loci that we find today, mutations which cause individuals to have blue eyes. Only one of those variants, however, survives, has probably introgressed into modern humans, and the other ones have gone extinct with the Neanderthal species. But this shows again the importance that the genetic of the blue eyes has had historically in those parts of Europe. And in an example of intraspecies convergence, blue eyes are not just like seen in humans, but they're also seen in other primates. Here I'm just bringing 3 famous examples like lemur, spider monkey, and Japanese stone monkeys. It is very interesting because as those animals occupy a certain geographic area, blue eyes are seen in the northernmost tip of that geographic distribution, geographic spread. And again, that's another piece of evidence that points to the effect that latitude and light exposure can have on the color of the eyes. Instead of a conclusion, I just wanted to bring the discussion back to the sort of art history theme that I started with. Here, I'm just like now showing a photograph of a very famous piece of art, the Metronome by Emanuel Radzinsky, or otherwise known as Rayman, the American artist. This is a piece of work that was intended to be destroyed as ephemeral art. So initially it was called the destructible, the object to be destructed. Otherwise, like after a few years, he just changed his opinion and he called it the indestructible object. And the very central to that is the eye of an individual. So it seems that the eye is like a timeless object of art as well. It shows also that the beauty is not just simply on the eye of the beholder, but is at the very much like center of our interactions, and it's something that we continue to appreciate today, regardless of its colors or regardless of anything else that surrounds it. This is how I wanted to finish this talk, and I wanted to thank a few people, particularly our KCL group, Zia Zhu and Mark Simcoe, who generated the genetics data, Manfred Kaiser and the VisiGen Consortium, David Mackey, who lent me some of his slides, Tim Spector, the studios here in Southern Italy, and of course my founders, the Fight for Sight and the Bright Focus Foundation. In case there's any question, please see my email at the bottom of the slides and feel free to contact me at any time. And of course, thank you very much to everybody for being here with me today.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Gosh, I'm very, very interested in the going back to sort of 35,000 years ago. Can you tell me how you actually get that kind of data?
It's partly due to the technological developments, because we have quite a lot of ancient DNA material available today through different excavations. A lot of that material has not been well preserved, like in parts of the world where humidity is high, for example, in Africa and East Asia, we don't quite have the level of information. But in Europe, in particular, atmospheric conditions that were so well preserved that could sequence them reliably, and you can essentially ascertain the presence of or absence of certain mutations that might cause different eye colors.
Oh, incredible. Dominic Myers has an interesting one. Are there any benefits? You mentioned the question of identifying disease, but are there any benefits to having eyes of any particular eye color?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that having the right eye color in the right conditions is very beneficial to you. There was a particular reason why blue eyes were initially spread in Northern Europe, because it is related with the intensity of the sun radiation. So yes, it's beneficial to have blue eyes at certain geographic latitudes, not so much like having the wrong eye colors kind of in the wrong location. So that would be slightly deleterious.
All right, Juliet Wigzell's come up with an interesting one. What is the relationship between skin color variance and its efficiency as a microbial barrier?
Again, this is a tentative explanation of why different pigmentation tonalities are seen in different latitudes. So again, it is not fully proven, but there is at least like there are good grounds to believe that it might actually change the barrier of the skin. It might make the skin a little like thicker and less permeable to certain pathogens whenever the quantity of the melanin in the skin is higher in certain conditions. Again, it's not fully proven, but it's quite a strong possibility.
Right. Clive Bonney, I'm not sure if this is absolutely true, but why are males more prone to color blindness than females? Is that the case?
Quite a lot of that is chromosome X related. So as men have only one copy of the chromosome X, quite a lot of those like color blindness are located on chromosome X, if not all of them. So as a man, you only need to have a mutation, only one chromosome to develop a disease, whereas in women, they have the other spare copy of the chromosome X, which, unless they have a mutation, both of them would actually protect them against color blindness.
Oh, interesting one now. John Wood, very topical question here. Will global warming affect the distribution of eye color?
I don't know, but I personally doubt. It's hard to predict the future. I personally doubt because it's more related to the changes in the intensity of light depending on where you are in the world as opposed to the temperatures. I don't personally believe that pigmentation, or I have no reason to believe actually that changes in temperature are related to the different tones of the skin color or eye color.
All right. Tell us more about melanin. This seems to be an extremely important substance if it affects, eye and hair. It's hair color and skin color, isn't it, as well?
It's hair, it's skin, it's eye, obviously, and there's quite a lot of that in the central nervous system. So
Yeah.
the gray cells actually have a high concentration of melanin.
All right. And presumably it's important for us to have high levels of melanin in our systems?
Well, not necessarily, because different cells have different ways to actually regulate the melanin quantity. So absolute absence of melanin is probably not something that we encounter very often. It can happen in certain forms of albinism, and it can affect certain central nervous system cells. For example, it can actually affect the size and the shape of the optic disc. But we are not aware, or at least I'm personally not aware of many cases in which like an absolute drastic change in the melanin quantities in the central nervous system would cause like a problem.
But doesn't the lack of melanin account for albinism in
It
patients?
does. As I just mentioned, like cases of albinism have like certain changes in certain neurons, particularly around the optic disc area. But presumably, I'm not aware of any sort of drastic changes in cognitive functions along albino. So there's a limit to how influential they can be over the function of the central nervous system, whose mechanisms are very well preserved and conserved from a genetic point of view and from a population history point of view.
Right. You mentioned the question of disease and sort of general eye health. What are the sort of, I mean, if you go along to the optician, what sort of things would they look for, and what could they actually identify?
These associations I mentioned tend to be statistically significant when you study them over large numbers of individuals. However, the clinical effect sizes are fairly small. So it's not routine for opticians to check your eye color unless there is a particular reason to do so, unless there is a history in the family for certain forms of glaucoma, such as pigmentary glaucoma or other very sort of low prevalence disorders that you wouldn't otherwise screen in the general population. But statistically, changes in the melanin presence in the eye are associated with things from refractive error, for example, like lighter eye individuals tend to have a higher prevalence of myopia in the population. Pigmentary glaucoma is another thing that is more common in certain individuals with certain eye colors, and so forth. But again, those effect sizes are quite small for things like myopia and a little like higher for pigmentary glaucoma.
Yes. You also mentioned Alzheimer's. I mean, in what sort of way does the eye change to show you that is this something which people may be prone to or which they actually have?
Uh, it is not quite known. It's again an association that is seen at a population level. So it's seen when you study large numbers of patients with Alzheimer's. So you tend to see uh, slightly more Alzheimer individuals with lighter eye color or like lighter pigmentation, generally speaking. It is not known why we see that association, so we frankly don't know. Sometimes those associations can be um, fortuitous. It can be because, like, for example, when the prevalence of a disease and the prevalence of a certain tonality of the eye colors are incidentally seen in the same areas. But there is at least some evidence suggesting that it may have a mechanistic link, and it might involve the amount of melanin that is found in the cortex and the central nervous system, but we are not quite sure what those mechanisms are.
We're getting excited about melanin today. Michael Dury is saying that melanin is claimed to overcome jet lag. So does that mean that blue-eyed people are more prone to it?
Melatonin, not melanin. Melatonin, the hormone. They are two different things, obviously, slightly independent. Uh, Melanin and dopamine are kind of part of the same pathway. Initially, when those pathways are sort of initiated, they're shared between the two. And then melanin is one of those branches of metabolism, and dopamine, which is very important in keeping us awake and keeping the central nervous stimulation is the other branch of that metabolism. So they're at a certain point like related, but they're two different things.
All right. Well, all I do is get on the plane and have myself a rum and coke and relax. But there we are. Now, Don Grocott is noting your work has been supported by Fight for Sight. Now, is there an outcome that relates to visual impairment in that?
That particular funding went to like our PhD student Mark at the time, Mark Simcoe, and his main topic was pigmentary glaucoma. To study pigmentary glaucoma, we had to better understand the mechanisms that are related to eye pigmentation, and therefore, yes, that produced actually a proper outcomes in terms of that was relevant to clinical outcomes. Yes.
Yes. Can you tell us more? I mean, it sounds like a very worthwhile organisation. Can you tell us a bit more about Fight for Sight?
Oh, it's a great organization. It's one of the main founders of of eye research in the United Kingdom, especially in those challenging times. Their support has been vital to many researchers, and they fund a range of different projects, like from lab work to studies similar to ours that are more like database. It is again as I mentioned, just one of the main funders, and in the eye world they are titan. The amount of their funding is kind of similar to actually what the likes of MRC and the Wellcome are allocating to the eye research. So it has been very vital to a lot of research, but also has been funding next generation of scientists as well through their studentships. So not only they're doing a great job keeping the eye research afloat, but they're also nurturing the next generation of the eye researchers. So we should be very grateful to Fight for Sight for doing that.
Yeah, so you're talking about the next generation. I note that you're broadcasting from Calabria, and I'm very jealous. But what is the situation across Europe? Are there particular centres for research into eye conditions and diseases, or is it rather more specifically the UK?
Well, there are. So there's quite a few good eye research centers around Europe and the United States. As in other areas of academic research, the United Kingdom punches well above the weight. So it is an avant-garde when it comes to any kind of research, including eye research. So it's not to say that other places in Europe, like the United States, are much behind, but yes, the United States clearly much more developed than other parts of Europe. Still, funding situation, in the world we live in right now, it's funding is challenging for a lot of things. The financial situation is not has been better in previous decades, maybe. So yes, it's quite important to actually focus and to essentially to get all the resources possible and to allocate those resources to the right people.
Yeah, that's very important. Now, Dayo Ajayi Ube brings us back to albinism. Can the albinism gene be traced across the globe, or do they more often occur sporadically?
Quite a lot of albinism across the world actually can be traced through families. Again, you have to have certain mutations. There are still no spontaneous cases every now and then just arising, but the probability of having a spontaneous mutation is reasonably small. But you can actually just trace a lot of those cases running through families. Again, you have to have often you have to have two copies of the same gene carrying different mutations that knock the gene functionality out. In that case, you can have one of them and be phenotypically normal, but it happens quite often that individuals like albinos have two of those copies, and therefore their pigmentation process are disrupted.
Yes, I'm just thinking about this question of the mixing of genes. I mean, in the modern day world, people are traveling all over the world. They're settling all over the world. I have a grandson who is undoubtedly descended from everything from the Vikings to an Inca princess, and I just wonder whether there would be an enormous amount of change in his genes if ever we had a look at them, or does that really make no difference?
Well, it does make a difference. As I just mentioned, the OCA2 or HER2 genes are quite impactful, but right now we just know about 200 genes that carry mutations or carry changes that can influence the pigmentation tonality. In terms of the genetic background of Europe, a population of non-European ancestry is slightly more complicated because, as I said, like we are unfortunately, very Eurocentric in our research. We have a lot of European subjects to genotype and to study. We are not as enabled in our research of other populations. There have been some piece of research specifically in South Americans, and there's a UCL-based group that is focusing on that, and they found some interesting results. Often those mutations are kind of recurring, spontaneously recurring in the same genes, but some of them are completely unrelated to the genes or mechanisms that we see in Europeans. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, Shane Drinian comes back to pigmentation variants in Europe. Now, you discussed how this was greater than would be expected for the 35,000 years since the continent has been settled. Now, could this discrepancy be explained by social factors? Is there, for example, a societal preference for blue eyes?
It is, as I briefly was showing in one of my slides. Yes, there seems to be a sex-specific effect, which is a very legitimate mechanism in terms of like an evolution. So we know that certain individuals have preference for a particular partner, and therefore they set a family. They procreate in a certain like in a way. They give birth to individuals who carry certain characteristics. It's not just seen for the pigmentation traits; it's seen for like a few other traits as well. But yes, that's a very strong engine that has definitely driven the pigmentation genes in a certain way up to the state that we see it in modern day Europe. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, something I was going to ask, sorry to go back to melanin, but it's an interesting substance. Are there particular foods which are rich in it? Are there things we ought to be eating in order to improve our eyesight and state of our hair and things like that?
No food that I'm aware of. Like exposure to the sunshine tends to increase the amount of melanin. This is why we often say that, again, before people getting exposed to the intense sunlight, they might just take that like slowly and be gradual so that the melanin builds up in the skin and protects from bad, essentially skin burns or like other downstream diseases. But no, there's no food that will do that. I just wanted to remind again, like the audience, that the connection between melanin present in the skin and other diseases, except for skin cancer, it's a statistically significant one, but maybe the clinical effects are not well established, and they may not be such a strong risk factor. So, increasing the amount of melanin may not be a protective factor to many of those diseases, or not in a very meaningful way, though.
Oh, that is well worth knowing. Now, I'm afraid we always keep to time with our particular webinar, so we can't carry on now with this very interesting topic. But may I say that if you've enjoyed this session, I certainly have, then you might look elsewhere among the Lord Mayor's lectures for related topics. And on the 29th of June 2024, we had one on modern eye health, which was sponsored by the Worshipful Company of Spectacle Makers. Of course, the main aim of these lectures has been to underline the forward-looking work of the livery companies and other players, such as the universities, in and around the city and in London. Now, we've got all sorts of interesting things coming up, and there's nothing like variety here. We have building urban resilience, an interesting topic with regard to the government's plan for building large numbers of houses. 4th of September, Neuro-Inclusive London. Again, if neuro is a subject you're interested in, it's worth going back to Knowledge Miles and looking to see the number of lectures we've had related to that topic. And Thursday, the 5th of September, looking again at AI. And getting kids to care about culture is basically a way of getting them more interested in museums. Curiously enough, I've just taken my granddaughter to the Natural History Museum to show her the dinosaurs. She wasn't interested in dinosaurs at all, but she absolutely adored the creepy crawlies. So there we are. Now, of course, thank you to the audience for attending today and your questions. Thank you for your interest and supporting the lectures. We're grateful too for support from King's College London, and especially thank you very much indeed to Dr. Pirro Hysi. Quite a complicated topic, but one which has come across very clearly, and I think we've all enjoyed that. Now, all of our lectures are recorded, posted on the Gresham Society website and on our YouTube channel, in case you'd like to revisit anything. You get the pictures and also the question and answers afterwards. And we hope to see you all again soon for another lecture in the Knowledge Miles series. And don't forget the Lord Mayor's theme for the year, of course, which is Connect to Prosper. Thank you, Pirro. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.